Hey everyone, so in this short video I want to talk about something that is a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I'm a bit surprised how many students I work with weren't aware of this problem. So I decided, okay, now I have to create this video because it's really important to hammer this home. Never render without caching first. And the reason is, now that we go into the simulation world and don't dabble around in SOPs anymore, we actually start to look at much higher simulation times, and you will see that later on, that when you play around with simulations yourself, that this is actually a problem. Now this problem becomes even bigger when you work with a render farm, and I know a lot of people that watch this don't have access to a render farm, but sooner or later you will render stuff on more than one machine because that's the only reasonable way of doing it, and there was a video before about this. So what you will see in production is you will never see a setup like this where you have a DOP network and then maybe some other stuff and then directly it goes to render. It will always look something like this, where a lot of people I've seen actually use a single node as an input and output. And if you've seen my writing file video, you know I'm not a big fan of this. And that is why my setup usually looks like this, where you have a file cache, that a node that caches out, and then a file node reads in, so it creates a gap. I found it the much safer way of working, but either way, it's important that you understand that after the simulation, first comes the caching step and then the rendering. And let me quickly explain to you why that is. In a professional environment, you basically never render anything on a single machine. I mean, yes, you do simulation on a single machine, and that is because we talked about the simulations mean that every frame is dependent on the frame before, and that means you can never kind of split up simulations, at least not easily, on a farm. So let's say we have a 100 frame scene, and the simulation of that scene takes 60 minutes, so 36 seconds per frame. I did the math for you. And then we render this and it takes roughly 2 minutes, which is very fast. So all cool. And then you realize, okay, that would mean 3+ hours for one iteration. And of course, 2 minutes is very low. So even 3 hours is very fast. But let's say you're annoyed by this and you have access to a render farm, which in the real world, when you actually do this as a job, you always have, because there is no other way of doing this job. And then you split it up, let's say, into 5 machines. Now you're a clever guy or girl and you realize, well, by splitting this up into 5 machines, each has only to render 20 frames. And since the render time is 2 minutes, each machine should only render for 40 minutes. So roughly after 40 minutes, I should have my 100 frames. Good thinking. Now you run this and you realize, for some weird reason, it comes out like this. The first machine takes 52 minutes. Well, that's still in the realms of, yeah, can happen. But the next one, 64, 76, 88 minutes. The fourth machine, that's more than double than what you expected. And the last one even takes 100 minutes for something that was supposed to take 40 minutes. What's happening here? Well, what happened is that you forgot to cache. And that means instead of running the simulation on one machine once, you basically now, before every machine was able to render their frames, they had to actually resim the whole thing. So it looks like this, and sorry for all the text, but the way render farms work is that the first one gets the frame range of 100 frames from 0 to 20, the next 20 to 40, the next 40 to 60, 60 to 80, and 80 to 100. And before the machines can render this, because you never cached it, they have to calculate the whole thing again. And that means, let's say on the third machine, he has to simulate the first actually 60 frames, because even though he doesn't render the first 40 frames, he still has to simulate them again to be able to render the 40th frame. And that means overall it takes him 76 minutes to render 20 frames. And of course the last one takes 100 minutes because now he has to resim the whole simulation. Now the problem is, the system doesn't tell you that. It doesn't warn you from that. The render farm doesn't send you a mail telling you, oh, you forgot to cache. It will just do it. And especially in a professional environment, that could look really bad for you if you do that, because it could potentially suck off a lot of machine time and calculation time from everyone else. So make sure that you cache it before you send it to the farm, or just make it a rule to cache it before you render in the first place, because then stuff like that can't happen to you. and the world is fine again and everybody likes you. So really important, always remember cache before you render. Thanks very much. See you later. Cheers.